I'm excited about this topic. I truly enjoy the existing building code. Um, as Maria mentioned, I authored the 2018 IEBC handbook. It sold like 2 copies, so there's not going to be any future versions of it. But I really enjoy it. I think the problem with that book was simply it was kind of ahead of its time. It's when we first started to really begin to use the existing building code. And there are still so many in the enforcement and the design industry that just aren't comfortable with it and what's required in the existing building code. So hopefully today, if that might fit you and your roles and you want to understand it better, hopefully you'll gain a good general understanding of the existing building code today. And as you can see on the slide, this is just part one. Today we're going to be describing the general requirements of the existing building code. And there's multiple paths that are there. We will go over the prescriptive path. Part two is next week. And then we're going to be going over also the work area compliance method and the performance method, as well as when we move or relocate structures. So this is really kind of the first half of the IEBC. If you're in California, I know California specifically does not adopt the work area or performance methods. They've only adopted the prescriptive method. But it's still important to understand those methods because you can use them as alternate means and methods approaches and likely get jurisdictions to allow you to follow those paths. So on this cover slide, you're going to see my contact information. It has the office number and email. If you have any questions on existing building projects that come up and you want to run them by me, if I can help in any way, I'm glad to. I'm glad to. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. So the objectives. We want to make sure that we get kind of a general understanding of the IEBC. Why do we have it? We want to discuss how it's laid out. How do we move around this code? The keys for this class is to go over the mandatory structural triggers. I see on the participants, we have some architectural firms that are there. While we're not going to be going over other triggers of the IEBC, these structural triggers are also important for you to understand, to know when you're going to do something to a building, when it might trigger additional requirements. I would say that 3/4 of the mandatory triggers that are outlined in the IEBC have to do with the structural provisions. We do have accessibility, means of egress, some fire protection items, but the majority really has to do with the structural triggers. So, and then we want to make sure that when we're looking at these buildings, that our minds are being wrapped around what might hit these triggers. Are we dealing with repairs? Are we dealing with alterations, additions, changes of use, move structures? Are they historic buildings? Each one of these categories has different requirements, and so we need to understand those. So that's our intent of what we want to get out of today's and next week's course. So part one, we're going to do an introduction today. We'll go through chapters 1 through 3, which apply to all of the compliance methods that are there. We'll discuss chapter 4, which is repairs. Anytime we're doing a repair to a building, we need to comply with chapter 4. And then we'll spend the majority of our time discussing the prescriptive method, which is chapter 5. And then next week, we'll cover work area, performance, relocated structures, and we'll do a summary with some different example projects. So part one, just an introduction. So here we have a picture of a main street. And hopefully in a lot of your minds right away, you're thinking, all right, these are older structures. One, it's a fun main street. There's a lot of character. It's probably very important to that jurisdiction and that municipality. Probably brings a lot of revenue, but just brings a lot of character. As a structural engineer, I am thinking right away, these are likely unreinforced masonry structures. And so how do I know that these could be, if this is in a high seismic region, these could be dangerous buildings, but I want to maintain that character and the use of these buildings. And so that's what I just want to get our thoughts on. The purpose of the IEBC is, how do we handle existing buildings? They could be perhaps dangerous buildings such as these, or they could be something even relatively new. But how do we get how do we find what is an opportunity really to make these safe, or at least meet a minimum level of life safety? And so we'll talk about that quite a bit. So it could be like on the right, you're adding new stories to an existing building, which obviously is going to trigger a lot of requirements. It could be something that you think is relatively minor, adding a small addition to the back of a single family residence like you see on the left. That addition definitely could cause some additional loads to the existing structure, but also you're likely going to be cutting large openings in that existing structure in order to communicate with that addition. So what is getting triggered? What do you need to do if you do that?